So, Triumph Speed 400 or Scrambler 400X, Sporty Naked Roadster or Rugged Light Scrambler. I was lucky enough to ride both at the Australian launch and thought I'd share some pros and cons if you're in a predicament between the two. Obvious answer, want a naked sport, get the Speed 400. Want a bit of off-road cred, just a little bit, get the Scrambler 400X. But we can do better than that. Are these two bikes interchangeable? Basically yes, but what are you losing going either way? Now these bikes are built off the same platform obviously, but Triumph have differentiated them in a couple of ways that make them unique enough to be considered different machines, in my mind at least, not just variants. You can't just change the tyres on the Speed and get a Scrambler X. As far as what sets the bikes apart, we'll start with the ergonomics, because if you're a new rider, this will probably be a big aspect of your choice. You want to feel comfortable on a bike with a decent reach to the ground and be happy with the weight of the machine. The Scrambler 400X runs an 835mm seat height, quite tall for a beginner machine, but more usual for the Scrambler or ADV segment where you need longer travel suspension and more ground clearance. Both bikes are fairly narrow across the seat, but the Scrambler is much taller, with that difference sitting at 845mm. For a bigger rider or one with longer legs, this will likely not be an issue and can help boost comfort a little in just stretching that seat to peg ratio out to give you more legroom. But for shorter riders, this can make reaching the ground much more difficult, and honestly, I wouldn't recommend buying a bike you can only get a tippy toe down on. Experienced riders can manage that. New riders, it's a recipe for disaster. This taller seat height is somewhat because of a longer travel suspension, and this Scrambler also carries weight a little more top heavy as a result, and is also a little heavier too overall, a handful of kilograms only, but the two combine to make a notable difference. I'm also not a huge guy, but standing on the pegs reveals a fairly decently long reach back down to the bars, longer than I'd want for an adventure style off-roading machine for longer periods, but that's not really what this is. The taller bars make for a more neutral sitting position though, and I'd say for longer distance travel, the Scrambler 400X is likely to be a big winner, as well as feeling like a larger and more substantial bike than the 400cc capacity might suggest, which as already mentioned probably suits larger riders. The Speed 400 comes in at a more lithe 790mm seat height, which is almost as low as you'll get without looking to a cruiser, and runs slightly shorter suspension travel too, bringing the center of gravity down and making for a slightly more manageable machine there. Bars are a little more aggressive too, so you'll be a little bit more lean forward for a sportier ergonomic. Obviously being purely road focused, the Speed does not need the extra ground clearance or suspension travel, so if that's the riding you'll be doing, you're not losing out on much. I will say both bikes feel well sized for 400cc machines. Obviously that's from the perspective of someone who owns a Ninja 400 and Sparkpillen 401. If you own a GS 1300 or similar, it'll be a different comparison, but obviously we are talking the 400cc class here. For most new riders, any motorcycle will feel big and heavy to start with, so I'd guess the Speed 400 will be the winner here to many who go and sit on both of these bikes and see how they feel between the two machines. Obviously the Scrambler is a little bit more suited to big riders. For reference, at 180cm or so with a 32-inch inseam, I found both bikes manageable. The only time I noticed the taller seat height was stopping the Scrambler on the edge of a steep incline where the road dropped away. That suspension is also worth a revisit here. The Scrambler 400X runs the longer travel suspension with 150 mils at each end of travel. The Speed 400 gets 130 and 140 mils front and rear in comparison. Both offer a very premium feel to the suspension, no doubt partly because of the big piston design of the forks, but those shocks are nicely sorted too. Here the Speed 400 combined with a shorter rake and trail gave me a lot better front end feel and confidence at the expense of a little bit of comfort or suppleness. Carving up nice twisties, the Speed had a clear advantage, and I'd even say for casual around town riding, the bike felt a little zippier and more balanced front to rear without any bias towards either end. Running Rosso 3 tyres no doubt gives the Speed an edge for pure road use too, as these are a seriously nice set of tyres for starting riding on. The Scrambler 400X on the other hand is a little more rear orientated, with the taller front end incorporating a larger 19-inch front wheel and not offering quite the same level of intimate feel as far as that front end. Also not as quick a turner into the corners or twisties as the Speed, or as fast on the changes of direction. The Metzler Karoo street tyres are fitted here, and I wouldn't have said they would impact handling greatly. They aren't quite as good as the Rossos for purely road riding, but they are actually a formidable option overall. As a result, I think it's the geometry geometry and larger front wheel having the biggest impact here. Of course, if you're more serious about off-road, a 19 or even 21-inch front wheel is preferred, so this is very much by design, and Triumph have decided to give the bike a little bit more credence as a scrambler here, where competition, say the Sparkville and 401, is just rolling on 17 inches. This all lends the Scrambler a little more relaxing handling overall, and honestly, if you're getting onto gravel or unsealed roads, you'll probably appreciate that more deliberate handling characteristic. Now that leads me on to the brakes. Both run a very formidable 4-pot front caliper, although the Scrambler runs a larger 320mm rotor compared to the 300mm unit on the Speed. The Speed came out ahead here on the brake side of things, not actually because of any real difference in the brakes, but trail braking was just more natural on this bike of the two, meaning I could push harder with more confidence more easily. To be fair, the roads I tested the Speed 400 on were better than those the Scrambler X had earlier in the day. To the Scrambler's credit, the bike wasn't pitching around on the brakes or diving onto the forks, at least for me at 75 kilos, although I wouldn't have minded a little more compression hard on the brakes into corners here at the front end. Comfort-wise, the Scrambler 400X was the clear winner, the seating position being more neutral and the seat coming out ahead. The Speed 400 isn't a slouch here though, and I did the slog into Melbourne on this machine at the end of the day, so that's always tough as a final impression. I'd say both bikes sit above average in the comfort stakes as far as the seat, and the Scrambler obviously wins overall here. Now the engine is shared between the two models, and from what we were told there's no differences here, but the Speed 400 did feel more sprightly on the throttle, which may just have come down to being slightly lighter and running the lower centre of gravity. That's a willing and smooth single cylinder with a punchy mid-range that really rewards keeping the revs up a little to stay in that sweet spot around the mid-range, and was much better on the freeway than I've come to expect of singles as far as smoothness. At almost 40 brake horsepower and 37.5 Nm of torque, both bikes deliver here, maybe not top of class, but plenty for new riders. Top speed will likely suffer against some of the 400cc parallel twin competition, much of which is turning into a 450cc this year, but Triumph have focused on usability for the performance instead of just peak power, which on a road or scrambler bike makes a lot more sense and will be more rewarding for beginner bikes too. After all, you're not going to see these Triumph 400s in racing, let's be honest. Fueling was smooth from a standstill too, and the low end is forgiving, so you can trundle around at low revs happily when you're not really having a go and still be having some fun quite comfortably. Both bikes run a 13-litre fuel tank, which will offer decent range on a little 400cc, and servicing is set at a pretty massive 16,000 kilometers, or importantly 12 months, whichever comes first, and that will almost always be the yearly service. I'd be inclined to do a do-it-yourself service at home with an oil change between 16,000 kilometer services if that was what I was doing. The one area I didn't really love on these bikes was the dash, which runs an analog or old school speedo with a digital readout for gear indicator, tacho, odo, trip meters, fuel gauge and clock. Call me pedantic, but I want an analog tachometer and everything else digital. I didn't like the shift indicator or digital tacho, but to be fair, you'll feel when to shift clearly, and especially being a small capacity engine, that will be often to get the most out of the bike. Luckily, it's a slick little 6-speed gearbox. Electronics include ABS and traction control, which is a nice little inclusion. Getting into the more subjective areas, I prefer the exhaust on the Speed 400 from a looks perspective, but both bikes sound pretty good for a quiet little stock machine. The Scrambler 400X has a bit more presence overall to my eye, but I like the stripped back look of the Speed. Wheels are cast despite the different sizes, and the Scrambler runs a different tank graphic with a bit more flair, plus plastic handguards which will only stop wind and small rocks, plus a headlight protector, sump guard and handlebar pad. The Speed also runs a single piece seat to the Scrambler's two-piece. Separating the two as far as buy-in, here in Australia at least, is $1,000. $9,990 right away for the Scrambler 400X or 10K, and $8,990 right away for the Speed 400, or basically $9K. To me, if you're not sure between the two bikes and don't know if you'll be doing some gravel roads or light fire trails, I'd recommend the Speed 400. As a new rider, it's a little cheaper, has a lower seat height, more manageable weight and handling, and I reckon it has a little bit more spirit through the twisties. The Scrambler 400X is a bit beefier in comparison, and I think that extra $1,000 will be best justified if you're a bigger rider, know you'll be doing some exploring in rougher conditions, or really just just love the styling differences, which is totally fair. I don't think you can really go wrong with either bike, and both bikes impressed as far as build and finish quality from the quick time I had testing them. What's the competition? The Speed 400 has the advantage over bikes like the 350 Royal Enfields or GB350 Honda in the spec loadout and performance stakes. Styling wise, there's nothing really super close in my mind, maybe a Benelli Leoncino 500 or Vitpillen 401, the latter being much more futuristic to my eye, so not direct competition unless you're just not fussed about looks, which certainly opens things up. The Scrambler 400X has competition in more modern styles with a 390 Adventure or Vitpillen 401. Nothing that really offers a modern classic look except the Royal Enfield Himalayan 450, which is more ADV than Scrambler, like the KTM. The lack of spoked wheels on the Scrambler 400X may raise an eyebrow here and there, but to be fair, most of these options are road orientated, and it took KTM years to add spoked wheels to their 390 Adventure. As it stands, the tubeless rims seem a safe choice for a bike that'll be likely primarily ridden on the road. Anyway, let me know which you prefer of the two new Triumph 400s, Speed 400 or Scrambler 400X. If you've got any questions, let me know. Don't forget to sub, like or leave a comment, it really helps the channel. Stay safe out there.